The knock came at 7:15 on a Tuesday morning, before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee. I remember standing at the kitchen window, watching the frost still sitting on the back lawn, thinking it was going to be one of those October days in Edmonton that can't decide if it wants to be autumn or winter. Then the knock. 3 hard raps, the kind that don't ask permission. I set my mug down and went to the door. My son-in-law was standing on my porch with his arms crossed and his jaw set the way it always was when he'd already decided how a conversation was going to end. Behind him, my daughter stood a half step back, not meeting my eyes. She was picking at the sleeve of her jacket the way she used to do when she was 9 years old and knew she'd done something wrong. "We need to talk about the arrangement," he said. Not good morning, not hello. I stepped aside and let them in. My name is not important. What I am is 64 years old, a retired mechanical engineer, widower of 11 years, and the owner of a 4-bedroom house in the West End of Edmonton that my wife and I bought together in 1987 for $142,000, and that I've spent the better part of 4 decades maintaining with my own 2 hands. I reshingled the roof in 2009. I replaced the furnace in 2014. I refinished the hardwood floors in the living room and dining room every few years because my wife loved the way they looked when they were done right. She passed from cancer in 2013, and after that I kept doing the floors because it was the one thing I could still do for her. My daughter, she's 36, moved back home 2 years ago. She and her husband had been renting a condo in St. Albert, and when the lease wasn't renewed and they couldn't find something affordable on short notice, I said yes without thinking twice. "Of course," I said. "Stay as long as you need. Get back on your feet. That's what you do." That's what I believed. I gave them the 2 upstairs bedrooms, one to sleep in, one for him to use as a home office because he worked remotely. I moved my own office down to the basement. I kept my bedroom on the main floor and my bathroom and my kitchen, and I told myself the arrangement was temporary and that it would be fine. For the first 3 months, it was fine. Not perfect, but fine. Then things started to shift in ways I couldn't quite name at first. Small things, the recycling not going out. The kitchen left a certain way that wasn't my way. A coldness at the dinner table that hadn't been there before. My son-in-law started referring to the house as the house rather than your dad's place, a small thing. But I noticed. Then in the spring they got a dog. They didn't ask me, they told me. My daughter called from a PetSmart in Sherwood Park on a Saturday afternoon and said they'd found a rescue they wanted to adopt, and they thought it would be good for them emotionally. The dog was a 2-year-old Rottweiler cross, 75 pounds. I said I wasn't sure that was a good idea given the hardwood floors. My son-in-law got on the phone and said the floors could be refinished. I remember standing in my kitchen, holding the phone, looking at those floors, the ones I'd done in March, the ones I'd done every few years for 30 years, because my wife loved them, and I didn't say what I wanted to say. I said, "Let me think about it." They came home with the dog that evening. By July, the main floor hallway looked like the inside of a kennel. The dog's nails had gone through the finish in 4 places. There was a long gouge near the front closet where it had scrambled on a hardwood surface while chasing a ball that my son-in-law had thrown inside the house. Thrown. Inside. The house. I brought it up one evening when they were both in the kitchen. I said calmly that the floors were being damaged and we needed to figure out a solution, either keep the dog on the rugs or put down some kind of protection in the high traffic areas, or we needed to talk about whether this was working. My son-in-law looked at me and said, "It's just a floor, Alistair." My daughter didn't say anything. I want to be honest with you about something. When I look back, I can see where I went wrong. I should have said something that night that made it clear this was not a discussion about floors. This was a discussion about respect, about whose house this was and what the rules were. I should have said it the moment they came home with that dog without asking. I should have said it the moment he started calling this place the house. Instead, I made tea and went downstairs. I told myself it would work itself out. I told myself family doesn't need contracts. I told myself I was being reasonable by not making it a bigger thing than it had to be. I was wrong about all of it. The summer got worse. There was a gathering, they called it a get-together, maybe 20 people, that I wasn't told about in advance. I came home from my Thursday afternoon woodworking class at the community center to find strangers in my living room and empty beer bottles on my wife's refinished floors and someone's jacket thrown over the framed photo of her that sits on the sideboard by the stairs. I stood in the doorway of my own living room and I felt something change in me that night. Not anger, exactly, something quieter and colder than anger. My son-in-law saw me standing there and walked over and said, "Sorry, should have texted you." Like I was a tenant being informed of a noise complaint. I went to my bedroom and closed the door and sat on the edge of my bed in the dark for a while. The next morning, I called my friend Douglas. Not in the file, a different Douglas. No, I'll just call him what he is, my oldest friend, a man I've known since we both worked at the same plant in Fort Saskatchewan in the 90s. I told him what was happening. He listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I've always valued about him. When I finished, he said, "You need to talk to a lawyer." I told him that seemed extreme. Their family. He said, "They're living in your house with a dog they didn't ask about, throwing parties you didn't know about, and calling your floors replaceable. That's not family behavior, that's tenant behavior, except tenants have legal agreements." I sat with that for 2 weeks. In September, I made an appointment with a residential tenancy lawyer here in Edmonton. I felt strange walking into her office like I was doing something disloyal. But I sat down and I told her everything, and she listened, and then she told me some things I hadn't known. Because my daughter and son-in-law had been living in my home for more than 2 months and contributing, even informally, to household expenses, they had established a form of tenancy under Alberta's Residential Tenancies Act. Not a formal tenancy, but enough that evicting them wasn't as simple as asking them to leave. I had rights, but so did they. There was a process. She helped me understand what that process looked like. She drafted a written notice, a formal request to vacate, as it's sometimes called in informal tenancy situations, giving them 60 days. 60 days was more than fair. 60 days was December. I took the paperwork home. I put it in a drawer in my desk in the basement. I sat with it for another week. On the second Sunday in October, I found the dog had chewed through the baseboard in the upstairs hallway. Not scratched. Chewed. There was a 4-inch section of painted pine trim that had been gnawed down to bare wood, with teeth marks in it. I photographed it with my phone. I sent the photo to the lawyer. Then I went upstairs and knocked on the door of what used to be my spare bedroom. My son-in-law answered in a t-shirt and sweatpants, phone in hand. I held up the photograph on my phone screen. He looked at it and shrugged and said, "Yeah, he does that sometimes. We'll fix it." I said, "I'd like you both to come downstairs to the kitchen. I have something I need to give you." My daughter's face when she read the first paragraph of that notice, I will carry that look for the rest of my life. Not because I wanted to cause her pain, because I watched her realize, all at once, that things had gone further than she'd understood them to go, that she'd let this happen, that she'd stood a half step behind while it happened. She looked up from the paper and said, "Dad, you can't be serious." I said I was. She said, "You're asking us to leave. Your own daughter." I said I was asking them to leave, and that I was giving them 60 days, which was more than the law required, and that I hoped they would use the time to make a good plan, and that I would help them however I reasonably could. My son-in-law read the letter standing at the kitchen counter. When he finished, he set it down very deliberately on the granite and looked at me with an expression I can only describe as contempt. He said, "You got a lawyer involved. Over a dog and a floor." I said the floors were my wife's floors, and the house was my house, and the dog was something they'd decided without asking me, and that the notice was about all of it together, not any one thing. He said, "We'll see about that." He took my daughter by the elbow and they went upstairs. I heard their bedroom door close. Then I heard his voice, low and fast, going on for a long time. I couldn't make out words. I didn't try. I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table and looked at the frost on the back lawn and waited to see what came next. The next 3 weeks were the coldest I've ever experienced in that house, and I've lived through 30 Edmonton winters in it. My daughter stopped speaking to me directly. Meals were timed to avoid overlap. My son-in-law would walk past me in the hallway without acknowledgement, which is a particular kind of cold that gets into you. I called my friend one evening and told him how it felt. He asked if I was second-guessing the decision. I thought about it. Then I said no. I said it felt terrible, but that I wasn't second-guessing it. There's a difference between something being hard and something being wrong. He said that was right. Then, at the end of October, 22 days after I gave them the notice, I changed the locks. I want to explain why I did this because it matters. 3 days earlier, I had come home to find a locksmith's van parked in front of my house. I thought they were here for me, that my son-in-law had contacted a locksmith to change the locks himself, to lock me out of my own home while I was gone. It turned out the van was at the wrong address, but the fact that my mind went there immediately, the fact that it was the first thing I assumed, told me everything I needed to know about where things had gone between us. So I called a locksmith myself. I had the front, back, and side doors rekeyed on a Wednesday morning while they were both out. I left a note on the kitchen counter with 2 new keys on it and a sentence that said, "These are your keys for the remainder of your tenancy, which ends December 9th. I was at my woodworking class when my daughter called. She called 4 times. I let it go to voicemail. Then a 5th time, I stepped outside and answered. She was crying and shouting at the same time, the way she used to do when she was a teenager. She said I had no right to change the locks without telling them. I told her I had every right, as the homeowner, to have the lock serviced and that I'd left their new keys on the counter. She said that wasn't the point. I asked her what the point was then. She said, "You're treating us like we're nobody." I said quietly that I'd felt the same way for a long time. The line went quiet. Then I heard him in the background, his voice, not words, just tone. Then the call ended. I drove home slowly. I wasn't afraid, exactly. But I was alert in the way you are when you know something is coming and you don't know what shape it's going to take. I pulled onto my street and saw their truck in the driveway, which was normal. But then I saw my son-in-law standing on the front porch, and he was not standing the way a person stands when they're waiting calmly. He was standing the way a person stands when they've already decided what they're going to do. He had something in his hand. I parked at the curb and sat in the car for a moment. Then I got out. He held it up when he saw me coming. It was a crowbar, a standard wrecking bar, maybe 18 inches, the kind you can buy at any Canadian Tire for $20. He said, "You want to play games with locks, we'll see how that goes." I stopped at the bottom of my own porch steps. I looked at him. I looked at the bar in his hand. Then I looked at my daughter, who was standing behind him in the doorway, and I searched her face for something, some signal that she was going to intervene, that she was going to say his name and tell him to stop. She didn't say anything. I said, very calmly, "Put that down and step away from my door." He said, "Or what?" I said, "Or I call the police right now and you spend the night explaining to them why you were threatening your father-in-law with a crowbar on his own property." I already had my phone out. I'd had it out since I got out of the car. He looked at the phone, he looked at me. Something shifted in his face. Not regret, not exactly, but a recalculation. He lowered the bar slightly. I pressed 911. 2 Edmonton Police Service officers arrived in 11 minutes. I know because I timed it from where I was standing at the bottom of the steps with my phone to my ear and my son-in-law still on the porch, the crowbar now hanging at his side. When the cruiser pulled up, I watched his face change. That's the moment the title of this story comes from, I suppose. Because I have spent a long time trying to find the right words for what I saw on his face in that moment. It wasn't fear, quite. It was the look of a man who had miscalculated badly and knew it and couldn't find a way out. The look of someone who had believed completely that I wouldn't do anything, that I'd keep being the man who made tea and went downstairs, that I had no teeth. He was wrong. The officers spoke to both of us separately. I showed them the formal notice, the lawyer's contact information, the photographs of the damage to the floors and the baseboard, and the text chain with my daughter about the locks and the keys I'd left for them. One officer went to speak with my son-in-law, who had put the crowbar down in a corner of the porch by this point. My daughter came to me while the officers were there. She looked smaller than I'd seen her look in years. She said, "Dad, please." I said, "I've given you 60 days. I've been more than fair. I need you both to honor that." She didn't say anything. The officer who had spoken with my son-in-law came back and told me that threatening someone on their own property with a tool, even without making explicit verbal threats, constituted a form of threatening behavior under the Criminal Code of Canada, and that they were going to ask him to accompany them for the evening. He was not arrested, formally, but he was taken in for questioning, and a formal warning was issued. The officer told me I could pursue a peace bond if I chose to, and gave me a file number. My son-in-law was walked to the police cruiser. I watched from the bottom of my steps. His face when he passed me was white, not pale, white, the color of a man who has had the ground removed from under him. My daughter watched from the porch until the car was gone. Then she went inside. She closed the door behind her without looking at me. I stood in my driveway in the October dark for a while. The frost had come in properly by then. I could see my breath. I went inside. I made dinner. I ate alone at the kitchen table and listened to the house settle around me. He came back the following morning, quieter than I had ever seen him. No car, a friend had dropped him off. He went upstairs without looking at me. Over the following weeks, something shifted in the house. Not warmth, not reconciliation, just the absence of the particular coldness that had been there before. Like the air had changed pressure. They packed slowly and methodically, and I gave them the space to do it. My daughter came to speak with me once, on a Thursday evening in late November, while her husband was out. She sat at the kitchen table across from me, and she was quiet for a long time before she said anything. She said, "I didn't know it had gotten that bad." "For you." I said it had. She said, "I should have said something. When he got the dog, when he threw that ball inside." I said, "Yes, she should have." We sat with that for a while. I didn't try to smooth it over or tell her it was fine, because it wasn't fine, and I think she needed to hear that from me directly instead of watching me make tea and go downstairs again. She left on the 8th of December, one day early. They rented a place in Leduc, which is about 30 minutes south. She texted me the address. I haven't visited yet. I think we will get to a place where I visit. I think it will take time and some honest conversations and some willingness on both sides, but I think we will get there. What I know is this: I should have set the terms from the first day. I should have sat down with both of them when they moved in and written out, simply and clearly, what my expectations were. Not because family needs a contract in the way strangers do, but because I needed to say out loud what mattered to me. The floors, the quiet, the dog question, the consultation before major decisions. I needed to say it. I assumed they knew. They didn't, or they chose not to. Either way, the assumption was on me. I'm not saying this to be hard on myself. I'm saying it because if you're in a situation where someone is living in your home, and things feel like they're shifting out from under you, the time to name that is the moment you first feel it. Not after the dog, not after the party. The moment. It took me most of December to repair the floors. I rented a drum sander and an edge sander from the Home Depot on Mayfield Road, same as I always have, and I worked through it section by section. The baseboard in the hallway I replaced entirely, cut a new piece from pine stock at the lumber yard, primed and painted it myself. The gouge near the front closet required some filler and blending, but it came out acceptably. I did the floors over the Christmas break. Alone in the house, radio on, the smell of oil-based finish moving through the rooms the way it always has. There is a particular moment when you're refinishing hardwood where the fresh coat goes down and you step back and the floor looks better than it has in years. Better than before the damage almost, because now you've taken it all the way back to bare wood and started again. There's nothing hiding under there anymore. Every imperfection either got sanded out or got filled and blended and became part of the surface, visible but stable. I stood in the living room on the 27th of December and looked at those floors. The late afternoon light was coming in low through the front window, the way it does in winter in Edmonton, flat and gold, and it caught the grain in a way that my wife always said was her favorite time of day in this room. I stood there for a while. Then I put the kettle on and sat at the table and had my coffee, and the house was quiet, and it was mine.